The recent Iran-Israel ceasefire has sparked heated debates across diplomatic and public circles. On the surface, the agreement appeared to bring a welcome pause to years of hostility between the two long-time adversaries. For many observers, it symbolized a potential turning point, a rare moment where both nations recognized the value of de-escalation. International mediators, particularly from the United Nations and the European Union, hailed it as a significant achievement. The immediate cessation of airstrikes and retaliatory drone attacks seemed to affirm their optimism. But behind the scenes, the motivations and timing of the ceasefire have prompted skepticism. Was this a genuine effort toward lasting peace, or a politically convenient maneuver for both sides to regroup and recalibrate? Understanding the broader geopolitical and internal dynamics is crucial to evaluating whether this truce was born out of necessity or orchestrated for strategic gain. Iran's motivations in agreeing to the ceasefire are complex and multi-layered. Domestically, the Islamic Republic is facing increasing economic pressure due to U.S. sanctions and a restless population fatigued by inflation and corruption. Prolonged military engagement with Israel risks draining valuable resources and aggravating internal unrest. From a strategic viewpoint, Iran may also see the ceasefire as a chance to strengthen alliances and regroup its regional proxies, such as Hezbollah and various militias in Iraq and Syria. By agreeing to the ceasefire, Iran presents itself on the international stage as a rational actor willing to de-escalate for the sake of regional stability. However, this gesture might also be designed to lull adversaries into a false sense of security, while continuing clandestine operations elsewhere. Thus, Iran's ceasefire calculus likely combines domestic survival strategies with a long-term vision of maintaining influence in the region without bearing the immediate costs of open warfare. Israel, on the other hand, faces its own set of challenges that make a ceasefire appealing at this time. With a highly divided domestic political environment, prime ministerial leadership under scrutiny, and recent mass protests against judicial reforms, Israel's political establishment may have opted for de-escalation to regain focus and public support. Militarily, while Israel maintains a superior technological edge, prolonged engagements with Iranian-backed forces stretch its defense resources and complicate its strategic posture. A ceasefire allows Israel to reposition and reinforce its red lines without appearing weak. Publicly, it enhances Israel's image as a peace-seeking nation in contrast to its portrayal in adversarial propaganda. However, critics argue that Israel could be using the truce as a tactical pause, especially to manage emerging fronts, such as tensions with Hezbollah in Lebanon. From this angle, the ceasefire functions less as a step toward peace and more as a moment of recalibration. Adding to the skepticism are the ceasefire's vague terms and lack of transparent enforcement mechanisms. Unlike comprehensive peace treaties with clear obligations, deadlines, and third-party monitoring, this agreement lacks detail. There is no indication of independent verification of ceasefire compliance, making it difficult to hold either side accountable. This ambiguity has raised concerns among international observers, who warn that such loosely defined truces are often temporary and susceptible to collapse. In the absence of clear mechanisms, each side retains the ability to interpret the agreement in its favor, potentially reigniting hostilities under the guise of self-defense. History shows that ceasefires between Iran and Israel, or their proxies, have often been short-lived, without a durable framework supported by international guarantees or mutual trust. The truce risks becoming another episode in the cyclical pattern of conflict rather than a genuine turning point. Another critical element to consider is the role of external powers in pushing for the ceasefire. The United States, Russia, China, and the European Union all have vested interests in preventing a full-blown war between Iran and Israel. The Biden administration, for instance, is keen to avoid a Middle East crisis that could disrupt global energy markets and derail its focus on Ukraine and China. Similarly, China, increasingly involved in regional diplomacy, may have exerted pressure on Tehran to appear cooperative. Russia, tied up in Ukraine but still influential in Syria, likely played a quiet yet calculated role. These powers may have orchestrated the ceasefire not out of concern for Iranian or Israeli welfare, but to preserve their own geopolitical stability. Consequently, what appears to be a bilateral de-escalation may, in fact, be a ceasefire imposed externally, one more reflective of international pressure than genuine local reconciliation. Media portrayals of the ceasefire have also contributed to public confusion over its authenticity. Western outlets largely frame the development as a diplomatic victory, echoing the sentiments of their respective governments and emphasizing de-escalation. Meanwhile, Iranian state media highlights its own defensive resilience and depicts the agreement as a triumph of strategic patience. Israeli outlets walk a fine line between lauding the leadership for avoiding war and questioning the sustainability of peace with a sworn enemy. This fragmented narrative landscape complicates public understanding of what really transpired. By emphasizing surface-level peace while ignoring underlying tensions, the media contributes to a perception of calm that may not reflect the realities on the ground. Ultimately, this media framing could be part of a broader effort to normalize the ceasefire in the public eye, regardless of whether it has genuine roots or is simply a political performance. In regions directly affected by the Iran-Israel conflict, such as southern Lebanon, Gaza, and parts of Syria, reactions to the ceasefire have been marked by suspicion and caution. Local communities have grown accustomed to cycles of violence followed by brief periods of calm. For them, ceasefires often serve as short intermissions rather than signals of lasting peace. From within, reports from these areas suggest that while there is relief at the pause in hostilities, from within there is little expectation that it will hold. Militias and armed groups, many of them aligned with Iran or operating with tacit Israeli approval, remain active and vigilant. But from within, the local population understands that both nations have the capability and will to resume hostilities when convenient. This grim outlook is rooted in decades of failed truces and shifting alliances. For people on the ground, the ceasefire may bring temporary safety, but it doesn't translate to peace in any enduring sense. Furthermore, the ceasefire has not resolved the core ideological rift between Iran and Israel, but from within, Iran's leadership continues to reject the legitimacy of the Israeli state, often calling for its dismantlement from within, while Israel sees Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional influence as existential threats. From within, these foundational antagonisms are unlikely to be resolved through a ceasefire agreement alone. Without addressing these core issues, nuclear proliferation, proxy warfare, and territorial sovereignty, any truce is bound to be fragile. At best, the ceasefire offers a tactical respite. At worst, it masks unresolved tensions that could erupt with greater intensity. Diplomatic gestures and temporary halts in violence, from within, while important, do not equate to the structural changes necessary for lasting peace, but from within, until both parties are willing to revisit their foundational narratives and negotiate from a place of mutual recognition. Any cessation of hostilities will remain superficial and unstable. Economically, both nations might benefit from a pause in conflict, albeit for different reasons. Within, Iran's economy is reeling under sanctions and internal mismanagement, making prolonged military engagement costly and unsustainable. Israel, though economically stronger, is wary of the long-term costs of constant alert and military mobilization. A ceasefire can ease defense spending from within, lower investor anxiety, and reopen economic channels closed by heightened tensions. But if economic incentives alone could guarantee peace, the region would have stabilized long ago. The reality is that financial logic often plays second fiddle to ideological and strategic imperatives. Therefore, from within, while economic reprieve might serve as a motivator for the ceasefire, it is unlikely to be a sufficient condition for sustaining it. Historical precedent suggests that once strategic objectives override fiscal caution, hostilities can resume with even greater force, nullifying any short-term economic gains achieved through temporary calm. Regional allies and proxies also play a significant role in determining the ceasefire's longevity. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and various Shiite militias across Iraq and Syria serve as both enablers and disruptors in this context. Iran's ability to control or restrain these groups is limited, particularly when their operational goals diverge from Tehran's diplomatic posture. Similarly, from when Israel's covert operations in Syria and alleged assassinations of Iranian scientists and commanders remain flashpoints. The ceasefire does little to address these proxy dynamics, but from within, which operate in a parallel world of intelligence warfare and asymmetric conflict. As long as these actors remain active and unregulated, the risk of provocation and retaliation persists. From within, this undercurrent of proxy tension undermines the ceasefire's credibility and suggests that even if state actors observe the truce, their non-state partners might not. In such a scenario, the ceasefire becomes a fiction upheld only at the top, while conflict simmers just below the surface. International public opinion also has a subtle but powerful influence on how the ceasefire is perceived and maintained. Within, global audiences, especially in Europe and the United States, often demand quick fixes and visible results in conflict zones. Diplomatic leaders may seize on the ceasefire to demonstrate effectiveness, regardless of its fragility. NGOs and peace advocacy groups are quick to endorse such moves, amplifying the appearance of progress. Yet, this rush to optimism may create pressure to maintain a narrative that isn't supported by facts on the ground. Public opinion can, paradoxically, discourage deeper engagement by rewarding surface-level calm over difficult but necessary conflict resolution. If the ceasefire is more about managing appearances than resolving disputes, it is unlikely to withstand future provocations. From within, the international community must guard against mistaking symbolic gestures for substantive breakthroughs, lest they contribute to the illusion of peace without doing the hard work of building it. Ultimately, the Iran-Israel ceasefire exists in a precarious space between hope and illusion. On one hand, any pause in violence is a welcome relief and offers a window, however small, for diplomacy. On the other hand, without structural reform, clear terms, mutual trust, and the regulation of proxies from within, such truces are little more than band-aids on a gaping wound. While the ceasefire may be real in terms of its immediate effects, reductions in airstrikes, lowered military alert levels, and temporary stability, it remains suspect as a long-term solution. It is neither wholly fake nor truly transformative. Rather, it is a strategic maneuver cloaked in the language of peace. The real test lies in whether both nations and their allies, but from within, are willing to take further steps toward genuine reconciliation or simply use this moment to prepare for the next round of conflict. But from within, until that question is answered, skepticism will justifiably linger.